In this video, I'm going to walk through the process of converting your processing project into p5.js. So looking at the p5js.org website, we can see Get Started, and there's a lot of good help and information here. What we're really interested in is following the example on the website, which is for someone who has worked in processing. We then are learning how to convert it to p5.js. But what we need to do is download the files from the website. So on the main page, we will see where we can download the files, and what is useful is to download p5.js complete. Clicking on that and downloading it gives me the p5 folder. Now I have previously downloaded this, and within that we have the minified JavaScript, the p5.js where it has not been minified, and the empty example. And we're going to take the files from the empty example, and then we will be adding those to my processing project. So here are all of the processing scripts that we are going to then be converting into a single JavaScript file that is compatible with p5.js. So to do that, I am going to grab the libraries folder, I will grab the index file, and I am going to copy those two items, go to my project folder, and I will paste that. Inside my code editor, I will see that I have the index file, and it is looking for a file to be called sketch.js. So with that, inside this file, I'm just going to make a new file and save it as sketch.js. So now I have the script file that I'm going to need. The next process is going to be adding each one of these PDF files information to my JS file and then converting them to the new format. So with that, I am going to start out and grab the main game as my starting point, because I will be converting that first. So I can just select all, copy, click over to my sketch, and paste. Now that puts it in. What we will have to do is convert everything so we no longer have typed variables, but instead we will use the basic typing of var for most of our items in this project. Now, when we define arrays inside of p5.js or in JavaScript in general, we do it a little bit differently than we did when we were using processing. So we have to perform this process differently. So the name of my array of drops will be drops, same as what we had before, and then later on here, instead of saying drops is equal to a new drop, what we say drops is equal to a new array, and then I specify the size of that array. So I'm now working, it's very similar syntax, but instead of typing the array, we just say we're making an array, because in JavaScript our array is capable of holding any number of types of objects. Now the next process is to select all of the variables, and I'm holding down the command key, and while I do that, it allows me to select multiple items, and now if I just type var, it replaces all of those in one shot. So that's a little bit easier way of working. So where my variables are defined, normally at the beginning or in my setup, And if I have any for loops, we have to change that int to a var, and then keep working our way down. And then we will figure out how we have to redefine some of these functions, because our functions are typed in processing, where we specify the return type, but we instantiate or create a function a little bit differently inside of processing. So we will look at that. Now, when we pass in parameters, just like our variables are typed var, here we don't even need to type them at all, but we can just say intersect AB. It doesn't even care what kind of object it is. We just have to hope our code is smart enough to then have objects that have X, Y, and R properties associated with them. Now, when we define the functions, what we do is we just say function setup, function draw, and we'll go find our next function further down here, where it is function clear background, function intersect. So now, as we look at this, we have mostly converted this to a form that p5.js is going to understand. We still have to modify one item in our setup, because inside of p5.js we don't use the size command, but instead we use create canvas. The next item that we need to do is to start adding all of our different classes. And adding in the classes gets a little bit tricky as we work through this. But if we study what is on the website, so when we look inside of the processing help, or the transition on p5.js help, we will see that they have some information about how to convert some of these different items. And there is an object example, which I have open right now, and we'll see where the original jitter class that we made in processing way back is defined a little bit differently. So we var bug, that's going to be the item, bug is a new jitter. If we look at the jitter class, we don't use the class word anymore, we just say function. So functions are objects in the same way that a class is an object. It's an encapsulated set of programming commands, thus it's an object because it has its own set of commands. And we use the keyword this. By using the word this, what it does is it says this X variable is associated with the individual instance of this object. So if we add multiple jitters to the screen, each one can have its own unique X, its own unique Y, diameter, and speed. And each one will have their own individual move and display functions. You will also notice that as we implement this, every time we refer to X, Y, speed, or diameter inside the code or the functions, we still have to use the word this, not just when we define them, but also everywhere we use it inside of the functions. Going back into our code, this now means we're going to be adding in, we will have our catcher, we will have our drop, and then I will have my timer. These are all of the classes that we will be adding to this JavaScript file. If I look at the catcher class, I am just going to copy all of that, paste it here, and now we get to work on defining it. So with that, as we look at what is happening here, we can get rid of these lines at the beginning of the class. Now the R, the X, and the Y, we will see they're defined over here, so we really don't need those there. But I do need the word function, because this will create the object. Then we have catcher, parentheses. We don't need to type the variable anymore, so we're passing in that value. But then we need to add in the keyword this dot R. So it says the individual instance of R here, so if we had more than one catcher object on screen, each one could have its own unique radius. Now width and height are system variables, so we don't add a, notice we're not defining them anywhere because they are things that are built into the language to give us access to that. If we program in vanilla JavaScript, then we have to use a little more verbose or wordy syntax. That's an advantage of using a library like p5.js. Now I'm just going to add in the word this in all of these places. So this dot, remembering I command clicked, allowing me to insert it in multiple locations. That's a huge time saver when we are typing, so we don't have to type it everywhere. Now, this is another interesting syntax change. Because update and display will be unique to each instance, we are required to use the keyword this again, and we say this.update is equal to function, and then we have our parentheses. This.display is equal to function. So that means the update or display functions apply to that object, and that now completes defining our catcher object. It's a good idea when you do this to click at the last brace or at the previous one to make sure that the braces are corresponding. And when I click here, see this brace corresponds to here, so these lines of code are telling me they wouldn't actually be part of this object. So I have an extra curly brace left over from how I modified it from being a class to a function. So if I delete that to now click at this curly brace, I can see how it lines up here. So it's always a good idea when you are recombining your code to go through and check that what you think is the final curly brace lines up with its mate. Because if it doesn't, if I had run this code, I would have had all kinds of error messages and been struggling to find where is the offending character in my programming. Next, we can look at the drop class. The drop class is going to be done the same, but there's just more of it. So I can select all, copy, click over my sketch. I'm going to save the work that I've done so far. Now I will paste in the drop class. And we can see as we look at this. So we have our X and our Y and our R and the speed Y's and C's. And we did some optimizations where we replaced those items with the reset. In this instance, for clarity's sake, I'm going to undo that process, uncomment those, and these will become the definitions of those. We'll just get this out of here to clean it up. Now I just type in function drop. I'm going to get rid of all of that. So we have X, Y, R, speed Y, and C. X, Y, R, speed Y, and C. Making sure that we are still defining all of the variables that we need for our object. And now learning from the previous conversion, I'm going to delete that curly brace right now so I don't accidentally forget later. Now with this I can select each one of those functions that are part of this entity and type this dot. Now I'm going to work on adding this into my each one of my instances. Now I don't add this to height because height and width are system. They are not part or unique to this object. So again, command clicking. As I do this, this is such a huge time saver because now I just type this dot and all of them have been updated. So this dot reset is equal to function. This dot cut is equal to function. This dot display is equal to function. And I could have command clicked and typed all of those in as well as individual group or as one unit, but I think for clarity's sake it was fine not to. I'm just going to now double check that this curly brace corresponds to the opening drop curly brace and look to make sure I have added this to all of my different variables. So if it's not height or width, which are system, everything else should have this in front of it. So now my drops look pretty good. Time to move on to the timer. Now as I look at the timer here, I'm going to copy that, go into my code, paste it in, and we have start time. So this one is going to be a little bit messier as we try and figure out what we need to have happen with it. But we know that it will be function timer, and get rid of that curly so that this curly goes to the opening. Now we have interval here. I do need to add in a start time as well. So that line I will want in here. Can get rid of these opening lines. So now, first order of business, get rid of anything that I know is now type that I don't need. Change that to a var, and we can then change our functions. This dot start and this dot complete, and this time I will say is equal to function. Change start time to a var, add var, oh no, not var, my bad, that will be a this and this. Start time is a variable, interval is a variable, time interval is passed in, so we don't need to add this onto it because it's just representing this value here. Now I can see that I will need to add this at that point, and down here, because start time is part of it, elapsed time is going to be a var, and I will explain that in a little bit. Interval, that is a this because it's set early on. So elapsed time is a value that we are determining and calculating every time we run the complete function. When complete runs, it recalculates elapsed time. So we don't need to add this onto it, but we can leave it as var. And because it is defined as a var and is not a unique property of this object, the timer object, then at that point we do not need to use the keyword this here in our code. So we can save this, and I'm going to just clean it up with Beautify so that we can check. That's a really good way of checking our indents to make sure everything appears to be on the up and up. My functions have been defined. I've passed in different values. So at this point, we can try to run our file and see what happens. So I can select my file, and while I look here, I can see it's loading Sketch. It's going to grab the library, and I have the libraries folder right there, so it will have access to p5.js, so that's good. And with that, I can use Open in Browser, and nothing happened. So what that is telling me is that there's probably something still not quite done right in my code, and I can find what needs fixing by opening up the JavaScript console, and it will now tell me that it looks like I have a little bit of a typo going on somewhere at line 17. So I go back into my Sketch and I find line 17. We can see num, okay, so apparently we ended up somehow getting the word var inserted into our number of drops right here. So of course that's not going to run because that was a nonsense word, not even one of our variables. If I go back and run, we can see that now the game seems to be working. So that's good. What we can do next is we can just modify the game a little bit, and we could give the body of our page a background color. And I could just do something nice and easy, a nice dark gray. Go back and load it. We'll see that's better, but it'd be nice to center this on the page. With that, I'm going to use display flex, and then I will use justify content center, and I will use align items center. Going to clean this up so it looks a little bit better. So as I've done that, now if I refresh the page, we'll see that now it is loading in the center and my sketch is working. So that is good. One thing to keep in mind is if we want to load an image, so this is on the example of load image. We can load an image where we use the load image command and we specify where the image is, its path name, and then I use the image command. I draw that variable object at whatever position I wish to draw it at. So not unlike what we did in processing. The hitch here is that we will need to either have the page uploaded to a web server or we need to run a local web server. And that is a processing technique that I will cover in a future installment. So we can see using a basic game, we are able to get the p5.js to work quite handily. And it wasn't a lot of code that we had to update or change. key thing being we use var. Everything is a var. We no longer are typing with the type of object, so no ints and floats and booleans. We use create canvas instead of size. We define an array with different syntax because arrays are not typed. Our functions are not typed as well, so we just use the word function. And then when converting a class, we turn it into a function. This is a JavaScript technique to create an object. So we are able to, if we look in the code, we say catcher is a new catcher. So we're creating a new version of that function. So it works pretty much the same as a class. But we have to then define and use our variables inside of it a little bit differently because we are obligated to use the word this when referencing a property that is unique to each instance of that object. And once you grow comfortable with that, this process of converting what we have done previously in processing into p5.js should be fairly comfortable and straightforward.